Hi there, grade 11s, and welcome to today's lesson on Nazi Germany and the Holocaust. In this video, we will be focusing on Hitler's rise to power, Hitler and the media, and Nazi military organizations. This is only part one of a two-part video series. In part two, we will be covering how Hitler applied eugenics, the Holocaust and its consequences, as well as resistance movements. The first section we are looking at is Hitler's rise to power. If you have a look underneath the heading, you will see an image of a bunch of hands that are reaching up and stretching out in desperation. You can feel a sense of almost urgency. Now, when I think about Hitler's rise to power, I sort of think of this image and I think of that sense of urgency because he rose to power so quickly that it's actually alarming. Let's have a look. The next slide is a timeline that will lay out all the key events leading up to Hitler's rise to power, and I have dated them so that you can actually have a look and see how quickly this happened. On the 30th of January 1933, Adolf Hitler is appointed as Chancellor. 1 month later, on the 27th of February 1933, very suspicious, the Reichstag fire takes place. If you don't know what Reichstag means, that is parliament. That means that the parliament building burnt down. And after that, KPD members were arrested. Now, KPD is the Communist Party. They were blamed for the Reichstag fire. 1 month later, and again, only 1 month, the Enabling Act was passed. Now, what this did is that it gave the Nazi Party complete power and control over laws and policies for the next 4 years. And what was the first thing that the Nazis did? They banned all other political parties. This meant that the Nazis were the only operating party in Germany at the time. This took them 7 months. 7 months. Hitler waits just over a year so that President von Hindenburg can die, and on the same day, Hitler declares himself Führer of Germany. All right, the first heading we are looking at in this section is becoming Chancellor. Now, as I've explained, President von Hindenburg, he was the president of Germany when Hitler rose to power. Germany was in a state of financial crisis, but why? The Great Depression. Not only did the Great Depression affect America, but the Great Depression affected the entire world. And Germany was badly affected. After World War I, Germany was stuck with paying reparations because they were instigators in the war. They caused conflict. And because of that, they were blamed and had to take responsibility for a lot of the damages that were suffered because of the war. So not only did they go through the expenses of a war, and war is very expensive, but now they had to pay reparations to other countries to fix the roads, to fix the railways, to fix the bridges. So Germany was in a state of financial crisis. And guess what? President von Hindenburg thinks Hitler is the man to save the day, so he hires Hitler. He appoints him as Chancellor of Germany in 1933. Lovely. Lovely. We then have the Reichstag fire. This took place on the 27th of February 1933. The German Reichstag building burns down. That means the German Parliament building burnt down. The body of a Dutch communist was found inside the building after the fire. Now that's when Hitler steps in and starts accusing the Communist Party of starting the fire. He plays detective, he's all like, I'm Sherlock Holmes, I know who did it. And the Communist Party members get arrested, and that basically wipes out the entire Communist Party. They are no longer eligible to sit in Parliament. The third heading we are looking at is Emergency Reichstag Decree. So we hear the word Reichstag, we can automatically assume this must have something to do with the Reichstag fire. And it's got the word emergency in it and the word decree. If you don't know what a decree is like a law that is made directly from the president's mouth or the leader's mouth. and it does not have to go through parliament. It does not have to be approved. What they say is law, and that is a decree. When it comes to decrees, there is no democracy. That is an infringement on democracy. Right. Hitler persuaded President von Hindenburg to pass the Reichstag decree declaring a state of emergency. If you remember COVID, South Africa was in a state of emergency, and it was because of this disaster that was COVID-19. This is a little bit like that. Because of the severity of this Reichstag fire and the panic that it caused, Hitler persuaded the president to declare a state of emergency with this Reichstag decree. It did not have to be passed through parliament. What this meant is that Germany was now not only in financial crisis, but also in political crisis. So what this does is it creates an extremely unstable political environment for Germany. And it is the correct concoction of disastrous events and states of emergencies and whatever for Hitler to eventually seize power. It creates this moment of vulnerability, fragility, and, like I said, instability in German politics. It's literally the perfect environment for Hitler to come out and declare himself as Führer. Now, in March of 1933, the Enabling Act was passed. Now, this act allowed Hitler to pass laws without the approval of Parliament for the next 4 years. Hitler had pretty much total control, no need for approval, can do as he pleases, very dangerous. No democracy there. This pretty much paved the way for his dictatorship. We are now at the final heading of the section. Germany becomes a one-party state. What that means is that Germany now only has one political party that is operating, ruling, and running the country. We know that that is the Nazi Party because when we looked at the timeline, I explained that the Nazis had banned all other political parties and they were now the only party left. Now you might be wondering, how were they able to do this? But we've just learned about the Enabling Act, and the Enabling Act tells us the Nazis can make all the laws and enact all the laws for the next 4 years without the approval of Parliament. And the first thing they did with that newfound power is to ban every other political party. The Nazis were now the only political party that was operating in Germany. At this time, President von Hindenburg was still in power. Poor man. During all this chaos where the Nazis were pretty much seizing power by banning every other political party, Paul von Hindenburg was still the president of Germany. But he was old, and he was sick, and he was senile. One thing you need to know about Paul von Hindenburg is that he had already tried to retire. He tried to retire twice, but every time he was called back. The first time, he was a general in the army until the age of 63. He tried to retire. They called him back at age 66. He retired again at the age of 71. He was called back again at the age of 77 to rule and run Germany. He died at the age of 86. The man tried to rest, but no. Anyways, Paul von Hindenburg dies at the age of 86 in August of 1934. On the same day, Adolf Hitler announces himself as Führer on the same day. We are now starting with a brand new section of Nazi Germany, and that is Hitler's use of propaganda. At the bottom, you can see two different pictures. They are both of a TV feeding a person sitting on a couch. This isn't just any normal type of feeding. This is spoon feeding. They're being fed with a spoon. And if you think about spoon feeding, if somebody says to you, I'm not going to spoon feed you anymore, In this case, they are relying on what the TV is spoon feeding them. And what we need to remember is that the media is controlled by the government. We are constantly exposed to propaganda. That is the manipulation of the media by the government to propagate a certain ideology. Next, we see a cartoon. This was generated by AI. I'm not even going to lie or try to hide it. Thank you, ChatGPT. This cartoon is trying to depict the theory of the frog in the pot. It was not so much a theory as it was a real experiment that was conducted on 2 separate occasions. So in other words, real frogs were used, real frogs were boiled alive. Anyways, for those who don't know the frog in the pot theory, let me traumatize you. You take a frog, you put it in a pot of cold water. The frog will stay there. It won't jump out. That is the environment that the frog is used to and that the frog is comfortable in. But you start to turn up the heat and the water starts to warm up. When you look at the second and the third frame, you can see the water heating up. You can see the steam. The frog isn't jumping out because the frog is actually like, I could get used to this. This isn't so bad. In the fourth and the fifth image, you see the frog is starting to actually almost get a little bit sedated in a way. In the sixth frame, that frog is starting to show signs of pain and discomfort, but it is not jumping out. The frog has been immobilized. The heat that was applied slowly over time has immobilized this frog. It can no longer move. It can no longer escape. In the seventh image, in the seventh frame, the same thing. The frog is reaching out for help, but it cannot help itself. It cannot jump out. In the eighth frame, it is too late. The frog is dead. It has died in the pot. The theory is that the frog does not notice the temperature change until it has reached boiling point, and the frog is dead and can no longer escape. When change is gradual, when it is slight and doesn't happen immediately, instantly, or drastically, it can go unnoticed. Okay, the first heading we are looking at in this section is Hitler and the media. So how did Hitler make use of the media in his propaganda campaign? Great. What is propaganda? Propaganda is the manipulation of the media, usually by the government, to persuade the masses, so to promote a particular ideology. When I'm talking about ideology, I'm talking about a way of thinking, a way to see the world. It's a world view. Hitler made use of the following forms of media in his propaganda campaigns. So we have the radio. Everyone had access to the radio back then. Not everybody had access to a TV, but everybody had a radio. And Hitler was a brilliant speaker. You didn't have to see him to feel the power of his words. You just had to listen. Great. The press. When we talk about the press, we're talking about any kind of news outlet. In this particular instance, we're talking about newspapers. So how did the newspapers portray Hitler? How did he use them to promote his message or his ideology? TV and films. Now we are talking about movies that were created to glorify Hitler. We're talking about video recordings of his speeches. Anything you can see on a TV, you could actually watch Hitler. You could look at him. You could watch a movie or a film about him. We also, which is not listed here, we can see that the Nazis made use of posters. If you look at the right-hand side and you look at the pictures there, those are cartoons. Those are posters that were created to glorify the Aryan race and to diminish and to discriminate against the Jewish race. Another type of propaganda is censorship. So it may not be something that you're putting out. It may be something that you are hiding, something that you don't want the public to see or that you don't want the public to be exposed to because you fear that that would turn them against you. A modern example of censorship would be the Epstein files. So most of us, if not all of us, will know about the Epstein files. Donald Trump has promised 100% transparency. However, we know that there is still a lot of information that is hidden from public record. That is a classic example of censorship of information to protect government officials, to keep them in power, to protect their image and their reputation. Now, what Hitler did was a little bit different. Hitler would have massive bonfires, public bonfires that everybody could attend. At these bonfires, they would throw historical books, political books, textbooks, any kind of literature that opposed the Nazis and what the Nazis stood for were thrown into these bonfires. I want you to think about how much knowledge and information was lost because of that. If you read a single page in your textbook, you know how much information you learn after that, how much knowledge you gain because of that one single page. Books with hundreds of pages, hundreds of books, if not thousands of books. The next heading in this section is Hitler and the education system. So if you look at the pictures on the other side, you can see them doing that classic salute. This is a classroom full of children. These aren't high school kids. These aren't army soldiers. These are little kids saluting, probably to Hail Hitler or something like that. In the bottom picture, you can see a large swastika flag. If you don't know what the swastika is, there you can see it there. It is next to the map. It's on the very far left side of the picture behind the teacher. That was the Nazi symbol. Okay, so now we're going to look at how the Nazis infiltrated the education system and how they influenced how children were taught, what children were taught, and by who, and how all of that was run and managed. Okay. Teachers were forced to join the Nazi Teachers League. No choice. They had to do it. Children and teenagers were expected to join the Hitler Youth programs. So these were like almost like Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts. Here they were taught how to identify and deal with traitors of the Nazi regime. This was kind of training them to be SS soldiers. Textbooks were burnt and rewritten. We know this because of the bonfires that we just learnt about. So they were, or their curriculum was strictly controlled. At school, students were encouraged to be loyal to Hitler and the Nazi party. How sad is that? You're supposed to go to school to learn, to be enriched, not to be conditioned. The last heading in this section is Hitler and the Church. It is a nice short one. If you look on the side there, again, you see the swastika, and that is in a church building. Underneath there, you see a whole church with priests or bishops or whatever, Nazi soldiers on the side there, and they're all saluting. Okay, disturbing, but anyways. So Hitler attempted to control the church, but he failed. Most churches criticized Nazi policy and would not bow to Hitler. And this is why he failed to control the church, because they said, we do not support you. If we read our Bible and we look at what you are doing, they do not support each other. We cannot support you. So because Hitler could not persuade the church and influence the church, he decided that he was going to ban all traditional Catholic churches, and he created the official Nazi church. The final section we are going to be looking at today is a nice short one. It is Nazi military forces. We are going to look at the different groups that defended the Nazis, that fought for the Nazis, that served the Nazis, military groups. Okay, if you look at the barbed wire fencing underneath the heading, that kind of is meant to reinforce the military. And next we see a breakdown of the three main military units that fought for the Nazis. We see their function laid out in the middle column, and in the final column, we see the number of officers. This is the size of these military units at their largest. The first heading of this section, the Gestapo. Now, the Gestapo were Hitler's secret police. I say secret because it was supposed to be a secret. Nobody was supposed to know if you were a Gestapo officer or not. Not your family, not your friends. People were supposed to be comfortable criticizing the government in front of you. It was supposed to be a trap. They were supposed to feel safe. Nobody knew if they were speaking to a Gestapo officer or not. Gestapo officers were spies that would report to the Nazi Party. They would often go unnoticed as they would conceal their Gestapo identity. These spies would identify traitors of the Nazi Party. So who were these traitors that they were looking for? Anybody who spoke out against Hitler and anybody trying to resist the Nazi regime. These were seen as political traitors to the Nazi Party, and these political traitors would then be killed, or they would be taken to the ghettos where they would be held until they were then taken to the concentration camps. If you don't know what the ghettos were, think about Warsaw Ghetto. Most people have heard of that. It is probably the most well-known ghetto. The ghettos were almost like a holding place. If you were on your way to a concentration camp, you would first be transported to a ghetto. That would be an overcrowded community, unsanitary situations. People often died there of starvation or the spread of disease. The second heading we are looking at is the SS. The SS was Hitler's elite military unit. Now, this military unit initially began as a small group of bodyguards for Hitler. They were personal bodyguards. They would make sure that he got to wherever he needed to go safely, that he remained unharmed. Personal bodyguards. They were not initially an army. They were just 4 or 5 people tasked with protecting Hitler. Now, once they had grown into an elite military unit known as the SS, SS officers would be tasked with managing concentration camps. Now, I want you to think about the concentration camps. I want you to think about what happened at the concentration camps, how Jews and many other groups were tortured, shot, beaten, taken to gas chambers, told that they were going to take a shower, told to get undressed. The guards watched them get excited. When last did they take a shower and the guards told them to step inside, knowing they were going to die? When you think about the SS, I want you to think about that, and I want you to think about what they did on a daily basis. Now, this group was led by a man known as Heinrich Himmler. Do not get him confused with Adolf Hitler. He is Heinrich Himmler. The final slide of this section and the final slide that we are doing today is the SA. They were known as the Nazi stormtroopers or the brown shirts. If you think about the Nazi uniform, you think about those brown shirts that they would wear. So the SA actually was formed before Hitler came to power. They were an already existing military group. So when Hitler came to power or during his rise to power, they had already been established. However, they became some of Hitler's most loyal supporters. The SA actually played a major role in Hitler's rise to power. This is what makes what happened to them later so sad, because they were so influential to Hitler's rise to power. So what Hitler ended up doing to them was pure betrayal. So the SA leaders were mostly tasked with playing dirty. This means that they would try to sabotage the enemy, they would try to sabotage Hitler's political opponents, and they would do this by disrupting their political campaigns, all so that Hitler could appear more attractive to the German people. The SA was led by a man named Ernest Röhm. The reality is that most people did not like the SA. Most people felt that they were too violent and that they were too radical, and people were scared of them. Because of this, Hitler decided to have all SA leaders assassinated. This occurred in one night, which became known as the Night of Long Knives. This event is actually quite disturbing when you start to think about it, when you think that these were the people that supported Hitler, actually his most loyal supporters. They helped him in his rise to power, and he killed them. So that is it for Nazi Germany for this video. Thank you so much for your attention and for listening. I really, really, really hope that this video helped you and that you are feeling a little bit more prepared for your June exam. Bye.